Yesterday, I had on the podcast Jeff Shepard, a lawyer who had served in the Nixon administration, who's written this quite interesting and remarkable book, The Nixon Conspiracy, which is kind of a post-mortem, an in-depth look at what really happened in Watergate. But it got my mind as I was listening to him, thinking about Nixon, a man that I always found remarkably intriguing, a very interesting figure. Many years ago, when I was recently out of Dartmouth, some Dartmouth pals and I sat down and we sort of had an interesting discussion. We said, if we could have breakfast with one person alive in the world, who would it be? And we made a list of candidates. And of course, Pope John Paul II, if I remember, was on that list. Reagan, who was president at the time, was on that list. And so was Richard Nixon. And when we counted the votes from about 8 of us, Nixon came in hands down first. We all thought it would be most interesting to meet Nixon, not Reagan, because our theory on Reagan was that Reagan in person would be pretty much the same as Reagan on TV. It would be just kind of what we already knew, but Nixon would be really fascinating to see up close. And so what we did was we created something, and this is a little bit of a scam, but we called it the Dartmouth Breakfast Club. It didn't previously exist, but we created it for this purpose, and we made some stationery that looked legitimate. And we sent a letter to Richard Nixon in Saddle River, New Jersey, which is where he lived at the time, saying, "You're invited to be the inaugural speaker of the Dartmouth Breakfast Club." And to our complete astonishment, he accepted. And he came, and he was very gracious, and we took photographs. This is my kind of a treasured photograph I have as a young man shaking hands with Nixon. And he sat down, he had a nice breakfast in a private room and in Washington, D.C., and then he gave us a little talk about the world, and it was just fascinating to hear. He spoke for maybe 15 minutes, but here was a man who could quote Sun Tzu, and he could quote Disraeli, and he could quote Machiavelli. And I think of all this now because I'm thinking to myself, first of all, I don't even think Reagan could do this. But certainly George W. Bush, are you kidding me? Barack Obama, no way. Biden, forget about it. I don't even think Biden can read anymore anyway. So you've seen here in America, really in our own lifetime, a dramatic falling off of standards. But even so, I have to say that although Nixon was this learned statesman, he didn't have Reagan's vision. Nixon was talking at that time about, he called it, it was a form of realpolitik. It was détente. It was finding a way to contain and live with the Soviet Union. But Nixon wasn't visionary enough to predict and work toward a world of rollback in which the Soviet Union itself would not exist. Not just that Eastern Europe would be liberated, but the Soviet Union itself would dissolve. It was Reagan who actually envisioned and carried out that vision. At one point, one of our buddies, Greg Fossetall from Dartmouth, asked Nixon a rather uncomfortable question. He said to Nixon that here we are in the 1980s and the Iran-Contra scandal is raging. But, said Greg, it looks like Reagan's going to get out of it, even though it might have wounded him a little bit. Reagan is going to survive. And yet, said Greg to Nixon, Watergate did you, Richard Nixon, in. Now, why is that? Why is Reagan going to make it when you couldn't make it? And you could tell this question really irritated Nixon. I could kind of see him squirming uncomfortably. And then he gave what was really a little bit of a nasty answer. And he said about Reagan, he goes, he says, at least he could say he was stupid. And it took us all by surprise because we realized what Nixon was saying is that's Reagan's defense. So I don't know what's going on. Yeah, sure, I did the Iran-Contra deal, but, I don't know what was really kind of the Biden defense, you'd say today, where Biden can say, well, I don't even know my middle name. Why are you asking me about this? And Nixon's point is that he was too intelligent ever to be accused of not knowing what was going on. So in a way, this was a rationalization by Nixon blaming his undoing on his own, you may say, excessive intelligence. But this was the kind of man that Nixon was, a fascinating character in his own day, and certainly the kind of character that is rare in our time.